You know, it's a story we've seen play out again and again. A great leader rises to the top only to fall in the most spectacular way. Today, we're going to dig into the anatomy of that fall and the really complex path to recovery by looking at the lives of two of the most legendary kings in history.
So our story kicks off with King David, and you've got to picture this guy. He's the shepherd boy who took down a giant, a poet whose words still resonate thousands of years later, a military genius, and he's described as a man after God's own heart. He was, by pretty much every measure, the real deal. And then, at the absolute peak of his power, at a time when he should have been on the battlefield leading his army, David decides to stay home. And in that one moment of idleness, a single glance from his palace roof sets off a moral avalanche that would change his life and his kingdom forever.
So how in the world did this celebrated hero fall so far, so fast? Well, the story unfolds with this just chilling precision.
What's so shocking here is the escalation, right? It all starts with a look, a desire that snowballs into adultery. But then, when Bathsheba gets pregnant, the cover-up begins. David tries to be clever. He brings her husband, Uriah, home from the war, thinking, okay, he'll sleep with his wife and everyone will think the baby is his. But Uriah is a man of such incredible integrity that he refuses to go home and sleep in a warm bed while his buddies are out there fighting. So David's plan completely backfires, and he goes from bad to worse to the absolute unthinkable. He writes Uriah's death warrant and sends it to the front lines in Uriah's own hands.
For a while, David probably thinks he got away with it. But in this story, power doesn't get the final say. Truth does. And truth shows up in the form of a prophet named Nathan. Now Nathan, and you've got to admire the courage here, doesn't just walk in and accuse the king. No, that would get him killed. Instead, he tells him a story. It's about a rich man who has tons of sheep and a poor man who has only one little lamb that he loves like a daughter. When the rich man has a guest, instead of taking from his own flock, he steals the poor man's only lamb. And David, the king, the judge, he is furious. He stands up and declares that this rich man deserves to die for being so cruel.
And with David's own judgment just hanging there in the air, Nathan delivers the final blow. He points his finger right at the king and says, "You are the man." The trap is sprung. David has just condemned himself with his own words.
The fallout is immediate, and it is absolutely devastating. Nathan lays out God's judgment. David's family will be ripped apart by violence from the inside. Just like David took another man's wife in secret, his own wives will be taken from him in public. And the child, the product of this whole ugly affair, will not live. The cover-up is officially over.
But here's the thing. This isn't just a story about a massive failure. It's about what you do next. David's response, which is recorded for us in Psalm 51, basically gives us a blueprint for what real, genuine repentance looks like.
Okay, so let's break this down. First, David just owns it. There are no excuses, no spin, no "I'm sorry if you were offended." It's just, I did it. It was wrong. Full stop. Second, he gets who he hurt, not just Uriah and Bathsheba, but also his relationship with God. Third, he realizes this wasn't just a one-off mistake, but that it came from something broken deep inside him. It's not just what he did, it's who he is. And finally, he sees that ultimately his sin was an offense against God himself, crying out, "Against you, you only have I sinned."
And listen to what he asks for. He's not just saying, "Please, please don't punish me." His prayer is a deep plea for a total inner transformation. He knows he can't fix himself. He needs God to create something brand new inside him, something pure, something steady. He doesn't just want forgiveness. He wants to be fundamentally changed.
And this is what sets him apart from the king who came before him, King Saul. See, when Saul got caught, he made excuses, he blamed other people, but David, he takes full responsibility and just throws himself on God's mercy. He's terrified that God's spirit might be taken from him, just like it was from Saul. And that response, that is why, despite this epic failure, David was still called a man after God's own heart.
All right, now let's shift gears to the next generation, because out of the ashes of this whole tragedy with David and Bathsheba, another son is born, Solomon. And this is the man who is destined to become the wisest and wealthiest king in Israel's history.
So imagine this for a second. You've just become king, and in a dream, God shows up and basically hands you a blank check, saying, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Seriously, what would you pick? More power? A super long life? Just an insane amount of wealth?
Solomon, feeling totally overwhelmed by the job ahead of him,
doesn't ask for any of that stuff. Instead, he asks for a discerning heart so he can lead his people and tell the difference between right and wrong. And God is so blown away by this unselfish request that he gives Solomon not only the wisdom he asked for, but all the riches and honor he didn't ask for.
And his new wisdom gets put to the test almost immediately. 2 women come to him, and they're both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. His solution is, well, it's as shocking as it is brilliant. He calls for a sword and says, "Fine, cut the baby in 2, give half to each." And in that moment, the real mother screams out, willing to give up her child just to save his life. And just like that, with one brilliant judgment, Solomon's reputation for wisdom is sealed across the entire land.
For years, Solomon's reign is a golden age. I mean, he builds this magnificent temple, his fame spreads all over the world, but this story has one more tragic chapter. It shows us that even the wisest man who ever lived is not immune to a fall.
The seeds of Solomon's downfall can be seen in one just staggering number, 1,000. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now, sure, a lot of these were political alliances meant to keep the kingdom safe, but the sheer scale of it points to an incredible excess and a massive, massive compromise.
See, unlike his father's sudden, fiery implosion, Solomon's fall was more like a slow drift. It started with small compromises, marrying foreign women for political reasons, women who brought their foreign gods with them. Then he started building palaces for them and temples for their gods. And by the time he was an old man, his heart had been turned away completely. The man who built God's temple ended his life building altars to pagan gods, some of whom demanded child sacrifice.
So what we have here are 2 totally different kinds of failure. David's was a crime of passion, a hot, catastrophic sin followed by a deep, gut-wrenching repentance. Solomon's was a cold, calculated folly, a slow, pragmatic drift where diplomacy and politics slowly took the place of actual devotion. And that is a chilling reminder for any of us that sometimes the biggest threat isn't the one huge scandal, but the 1,000 tiny, seemingly wise compromises that lead you miles away from where you started.
So when you put these 2 stories side by side, they leave us with a really powerful and honestly pretty sobering lesson about leadership, about wisdom, and about the human heart.
And it all boils down to this one haunting question. If the wisest man who ever lived could compromise his way into total ruin, what does that say about our own vulnerability? You know, maybe it suggests that true wisdom isn't just about knowing the right thing to do. Maybe it's about having the humility to actually do it, day after day after day.